Well, good morning. How are we doing? Yeah? Hey, why don't you guys give yourselves a hand? I'll tell you why in just a second. Come on, join me. Give yourselves a hand. Okay. Because many of you guys showed up 15 minutes early to this service thinking that you were at the 9:30 service, but I have news for you. Welcome to the 10:45, okay? Now, we lost an hour last night, which is tough. But I have some encouraging news because we're gonna be talking about connecting with God through rest this morning. And actually, I thought a lot about this, and instead of talking and spending about, half an hour or so going through God's word and talking through this idea of rest, why don't we just apply it right now? Like, how does a little power nap sound to you guys? You guys sprawl out, we'll bring Becca out. She can do a little violin for us. We can take a little rest. And if you guys are looking around, like, where's Jeremy at? Guys, Jeremy's on vacation, okay? Like, he's not even gonna know. Just kidding. Yeah, we're not gonna do that. But if you will, flip with me to Matthew chapter 11. That's where we're gonna be this morning. And we have had these Rhythms of Grace series before, and we're in the midst of a John series, but we're taking a break to talk about this idea of rest. And we've talked about celebration, we've talked about prayer, we've talked about truth, and this morning, it's this idea of rest. And I was thinking back to about a year ago on this Sunday, what the season was like here in this March season. And I was helping lead worship at a youth conference, and there were like 2,000 people. It was crazy. Everyone was just piled in. It was a great time. And that Saturday night, Kim Reynolds comes on and she's like, hey, this COVID thing it's pretty serious. And I'm like, oh no, I was just with a ton of people. And then we ended up canceling our church service the very next morning. Like, that was this Sunday a year ago, right? And all of a sudden, I'm thinking, okay, like, this might go on a week or maybe 2 weeks and we'll be fine. Then March Madness gets canceled, right? And man, if you know the American society, if we're canceling sports, this is a big deal. This is a big deal. And so all of that to say, we kind of had this moment a year ago today where we were forced to take a step back, right? We didn't have live sports to watch. We didn't even have church service to go to on Sunday. We didn't have kids events to go to. We didn't have school to go to. And we all were forced to kind of take this step back and kind of reevaluate, just slow down life a little bit. And I think for many of us, like, it was healthy. Like, it was relatively healthy. But obviously, you guys know, like, we are having church this morning in person. March Madness, today is Selection Sunday. Like, it's gonna happen. Who knows how well it's gonna happen and how many teams get eliminated from COVID, but it's gonna happen. And so you see that we're kind of finding this new way of normal through COVID. And as these rhythms and as these weekly routines start to resurface, how are we gonna be finding rest for our souls? How are we gonna be doing that? So in Matthew chapter 11, here's what we read. Here's what we read in verse 28. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened." You see right here, Jesus, he's giving this completely open invitation for people to come to him, to come to God. And back then, this was not normal. See, the religious leaders at the time, they were known as the Pharisees, and they did not make this easy for people to do. They loved rules. If you guys ever go into a place and they have a list of rules, maybe you think of like a camp or maybe even Sky Zone or whatever you think of in your head of a place that has rules. And they're like, hey, we only have 3 rules. And as you're looking at these, rule number 1.A, blah, 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 1.B, 1.C, 1. And they just go all on, this whole thing is just rule 1, and they do that with 2 and 3, and you soon realize 3 rules, that's some false advertising. Like, that's not true. This is like 27 rules. They're just putting it as 3 rules. And that was the Pharisees. They made it so hard to connect with God. They made it so hard, and so it was such a burden to them. And man, my sister, she had this with a teacher. When in first grade for her, a first grade teacher, can you believe this? This is where I went to elementary school. This teacher had her kids, when they went in a line throughout the hallways, they were literally like robots. Like, they walked like this, and if they even made a noise, like if they made a noise at all, you would just hear her go, shh. And so we're all like, we were in the upper grades, like a few grades older than my sister, and if we were like trying to study or do a test in school, and all of a sudden you hear, shh, we're like, oh, that's the first grade. And she was louder than the kids were. And it was to the point where my sister would come home and she would literally be in tears because of this teacher. Like, she was weary and burdened by this. And that's what it was like for these people when we read about this passage about Jesus saying, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. That's what it was like for them. Like, it was extremely burdensome. It was tiring, and it wasn't easy. Yet here Jesus is saying that, just come to me, all of you who are feeling this way. I want you, and I want to give you rest. And we don't have the same burdens of my sister or these people that we're reading about in Matthew. I think we would all be lying if we said that we don't have these feelings where we're sometimes worn down, where we sometimes are burdened. Like, I know in my own life, this past week has been kind of crazy. It's been crazy. I felt a little burdened. I had a college class that was ending, had a final paper I had to get done. I led worship at this retreat Friday and Saturday. Joe, the guy who sang up here, somehow convinced me to work out with him at 5 o'clock in the morning, okay? Ridiculous, Joe, wherever you are. Come on. And that all happened, and I started dog sitting this weekend, and then I wrote this message last night right before I went to bed. Okay, good. I didn't. I was just kidding. But thankfully, I didn't wait that long to work on this. It's still a crazy week, and I felt kind of weighed down, and guys, shoot, I'm not even married yet. Like, I wonder if this past week would have felt like less of a burden or more of a burden with a spouse. I'm not gonna answer that this morning. I'm just kidding. I 100% believe that if in a healthy marriage relationship, I would have felt less burdened. 100% believe that. But as you think through your past week, you've got the rundown of all the things that make you tired, right? All the things that make you weary. Maybe it's your job. Maybe it's your search for a job. Maybe it's trying to figure out what retirement looks like and what that new season of life is gonna be for you. Maybe it's a close friend or family member who isn't doing so hot. It could be financial struggles. It could be being newly married and you're working through those first few years together. Maybe it's schoolwork for you. It could be some personal issues that you have to deal with yourself. Or maybe it's all of you who have those little ones that are running your life, or maybe now they're the big ones that are still running your life. And many of you guys have more than one. You have more than one. You know, I've asked a lot of parents, how do you guys make it through the baby stage? And you're thinking like, Garrett, that's kind of a weird question for you to be asking. I get that, it kind of is. But a lot of the people that I found that I'm friends with, they are in this stage of life. So I'm just trying to, relate to them, kind of be nice to them. So I'm like, guys, how do you do it? And they all look at me like this. You just make it, man. You just find a way to do it, man. Like all of them have this blank stare and they're just like, you just find a way. I don't know how to do it, but you just find a way. And so here they are with these little ones. And we're making fun of it, and we're having fun with this, right? These burdens and these wearisome times. But guys, this is real stuff, right? You know what they are in your own life, and they aren't easy. Life is going to bring those things, and that's okay. And if you are someone today who's feeling weary and tired, maybe feeling burdened, then my hope for you this morning is that you will discover true rest. And even those of you who are on vacation and sleeping in and in your PJs and watching online and by the ocean, you may be feeling rested, but that's my same hope for you too, that you will be discovering true rest with us this morning. So Jesus says, come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Jesus makes this sound so simple, yet if our lives are any indication, we are far from really grasping this. And so I want to go over 3 enemies of rest that we find ourselves going up against. And the first one is right here. It's our earning mentality. And if we're honest with ourselves, I think that we all have this thought process when we think of rest. We think, I have worked really hard this week. I've earned this weekend. Like I've earned this weekend. Or hey, Chick-fil-A, they have fed me 6 days in a row. They deserve a break, right? Right? Yeah, Sunday morning, Sunday, the whole day actually. Chick-fil-A, just take a breather because it fed me a lot. Or I just need another vacay. Like if I don't get this trip, I'm just gonna lose it. Or maybe if I could just get COVID so I don't have to work for 2 weeks, like that'd be great. Hope you're not thinking that. Don't be thinking that. But yeah, seriously, in our minds, we almost play this game of, man, I have earned it. I've earned it. And if we've done enough non-restful things, we are surely due for a little bit of rest, right? I recently went to Arizona with some college friends. It was a super fun trip. I loved it. Saw the Grand Canyon for the first time. It was that week in February when it was like -30 wind chill here. Remember that Sunday? Yeah, we flew to 70 degrees and sunny. It was like 100-degree difference. Amazing, right? We did a lot of hiking. And so physically, it may not have been the most restful trip, but I came back so refreshed. Like I came back and I'm thinking, okay, when's the next trip? Who are we gonna go with? Where's it gonna be? Let's get this planned, let's get it on the calendar. And then all of a sudden it kind of hit me as I'm thinking through like who I'm gonna go with and where to go. God's design for rest in our lives was never for it to be one of these. It was never for it to be one of these. And this is how I felt when I went on this trip. My rest level was kind of down in here, right? Down. This is GameStop stock, by the way. This, if you've paid attention to the stock markets recently, this one you've probably heard of. But you're gonna see this. I'm gonna use this as an illustration. But we've got this rest down here. This is our like rest level. And all of a sudden you go on a trip to like Arizona or something and boom, you feel really rested. And then after the trip, you're just right back to where you once were. Or maybe for you, this is your work week, and this little blip is your weekend. Or if you have tons of kids and you do sports events and everything, then maybe this section, your work week, is the restful part, and this is the crazy part for you. But no matter how you view it, a lot of times this is how rest is in our life. And so, and once again, there's nothing against trips or vacations. By all means, take a trip. Like go somewhere fun, enjoy the beauty of God's creation, do that. But what I'm trying to get at with this is the second enemy of rest, and it's this. It's that this rest is temporary satisfaction. That's the second enemy. See, the rest that we pursue, it does not last. The rest that we have earned, it doesn't actually work. It's this short satisfaction that will quickly run out. It will give you this initial rest, almost like drinking an energy drink or maybe a cup of coffee or your multiple cups of coffee, but it'll soon wear out. You find yourself right back to being burdened and weary again. And so how do we find rest in the mundane? Like in the everyday, normal, daily rhythms of life, how do we find rest? If we go back to the very beginning of this book, we'll find ourselves within the story of creation in Genesis 1. And it's this awesome account where God literally will speak things into existence. He speaks light, he speaks the world, he speaks the sky, the moon, the sun, the stars, all of this, the plants, the animals, the land, the sea, all of it he speaks into existence. And finally he gets to you and I, that we were created in his own image, and he forms us, and he breathes life into us. And then we get to the seventh day that we read about. And here's what we read about in Genesis 2:2. It says, by the seventh day, God had finished the work that he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and he made it holy because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Has it ever occurred to you that God had rest in mind before we screwed it up? Like before sinfulness entered the world, God rested. Not because he was tired, not because he was weary, not because he was burdened, but he just rested. Have you ever thought that maybe our rest, the rest that we find ourselves pursuing, isn't the same as God's rest? What would it look like to enter into his rest and not our own? And many of us maybe are thinking through this question right now as I'm asking it, but very quickly we can dismiss it in our minds because of the last and the greatest enemy of rest, and that's this. It's hurry. Now, this is different than having a really busy schedule or a lot of things going on, which many of us do. Busyness can sometimes lead to hurry, but they're not equal. And honestly, depending on your personality, you might like to have a full schedule, and I'm probably one of those people. But the amount of activities isn't the enemy to rest, it is hurry. There's a book that's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Comer, and he writes the following in regard to hurry. The hurried life of speed is the new normal in the Western world, and it's toxic. It's toxic. It sounds harsh, but he's right, isn't he? Like when I'm hurried, I'm not present with people. I'm not loving people. I'm not kind to people. You know, I surely am not thinking of others. And I'm not causing those around me to be less hurried either. And if we asked ourselves if we like to be around people who are hurried, I don't think any of us would say, yeah, I like to be around those people. You know, think of those times that you're driving and all of a sudden you see something in your rearview mirror that catches your eye. And it's this guy who is going nutso behind you. He's bobbing, he's weaving, he's going left and right, trying to merge and get through all of this traffic. And he just all of a sudden zooms past you. And it's this guy in his Ford F-150, right? No, it's not just any Ford 150 though. It's the raised truck with the massive tires with the muffler that's just is like, how did he fit that on there? And that's the guy who's just whizzing past you, going crazy. And you're like, man, he's probably gonna cause an accident. This guy's really annoying me. But this is one of the sweetest moments when you pull up to the next stoplight, right? And guess who you pull right up to? Ford F-150, right? Like he just spent all this time, and you have to hold back. You just want to roll down your window, kind of look at him and be like, was that worth it? Was that worth all the gas that you wasted and the people that you made mad? And he and you know what? We can give him grace if he was taking his wife to deliver a baby. That's the one exception to that. But if it wasn't that, right? We all know like this guy's annoying. He is hurried. He's really hurried, right? And so that's the hurried life. And some of you are thinking of that one person who has that hurry just all about themselves. Yet others of you are thinking, that's me. I'm the one that's hurried. Though I'd encourage you not to play this comparison game this morning because hurry has become so regular in our lives and in our society that it's sometimes even hard to recognize it in our own lives. I mentioned that book by John Comer earlier, and he puts it this way. All too often, our hurry is a sign of something else. It's something deeper. Usually that we're running away from something. Father wounds, childhood trauma, last names, deep insecurity or deficits of self-worth, fear of failure, pathological inability to accept the limitations of our humanity, or maybe simple boredom with the mundane of middle life. Or we're running to something else, promotions or purchases or experiences or stamps on our passports or the next high, searching in vain for something that no earthly experience has to offer, a sense of self-worth and love and acceptance. And we see here that truthfully, the hurry that we experience outwardly, it's really a reflection of the hurry that's happening in our hearts. So whatever it is that you are running to or that you're running from, stop running. Give yourself some space to hear these words from Jesus when he says, come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So stop running. Stop trying to earn your rest. Stop chasing after this temporary rest that won't actually sustain you. Instead of earning our rest, let's be reminded of this truth this morning that God's rest, it's given. God's rest is given. Partake of this rest. He wants to give you his rest. Remember when we talked about this story in Genesis, this creation story, and we flipped back and we talked about that verse where God describes his rest. There's another really big point that I do not want us to miss from that. And the whole thing is very poetic in how it's written. The whole creation narrative, super poetic. And after every single day, it kind of describes like what God said and what God created in that day. At the very end, it says, and there was evening and there was morning, the blank day. And no, it's not a cuss word blank day. It's like the first day, the second day, the third day, the fourth day, et cetera, et cetera. But we get to this seventh day, right? When God, we just read it on the screen a little bit ago, God started this thing of rest. And at the end of that seventh day, we never read, and there was evening and there was morning, the seventh day. That's not there. The indication there is that God's rest that he started back before we screwed it all up, that rest is still present to this day. It didn't end like the other days of creation, and it's still continuing on to right now for us to enter into. And so we find this truth about God's rest, that it is eternal. God's rest is eternal. He doesn't let it ebb and flow, and it provides a place for our souls to truly be at peace forever. When we are constantly on the move, and when we're hurried by all of life's demands, we will find it so hard to be brought into this kind of rest, into God's rest, and we will instead run to our own version of it. Like how many times do we find ourselves resting by mindlessly scrolling through Facebook, and then Instagram, and then TikTok, and watch out for TikTok. Like that one will get you for quite some time, right? And then maybe for you, it's turning on the TV or watching one TV show that turns into 2, 3, 4, 5 TV shows. Is that the kind of rest that will sustain you? Is that the kind of rest that gives you peace and comfort in the deepest part of who you are? We live in such a fast-paced, hurried life that we don't really want to have time to think. If we are constantly stimulated and distracted and go, like we don't have to address the real us, the messy us, the unrestful us. And some of you are hearing this message and you're thinking that you yourself, you're not actually that hurried. Like if you wrote out your schedule, you'd be feeling pretty good about how not hurried you are. But remember that this idea of hurry, it's more of a heart issue than a schedule issue. And for some of you, your mind races at the thought of the injustices that happen in our society. You find your mind racing with the fear of COVID-19 and how it's affected your everyday life. Your mind races when you think of the slavery of human trafficking that is far worse than we could ever imagine. You think through the Uyghur slaves who are being mistreated in Asia. You think about your family member who doesn't know Jesus, or your friend who is struggling with suicidal thoughts and depression. And all of these things just seem overwhelming, and your mind is hurried. Your heart is hurried. There's an article that a staff member shared with us this past year, and it brought some incredible insight to this very subject. And the article is called, How 2020 is Taking a Toll on Your Soul. And it for sure is carried into this year of 2021. And Alan Schleman, he references a Texas pastor who put it this way. He asked the question, could it be that God did not wire us to carry every event taking place in every part of the world at every moment as if it were ours? Could it be that technology has produced a faux omniscience and omnipresence that is hurting mankind and not helping it? You guys feel this? Like no matter when something bad in the world happens, don't each of us get a ding on our phone like, oh, Apple News, earthquake just happened. Apple News, tsunami just happened. Apple News, right? Followed by another tragedy and another, and pretty soon we find ourselves mentally and emotionally hurrying to try to process all of this, or we just become numb to it. Oh look, another hurricane is hitting the coast again. Good thing I live in Iowa. Just kidding with that one too, because we have derechos now. Like, who would have thought? And so if you are thinking that, please stop thinking that, because we don't want to have another one of those. That was terrible. So we have these hurried or numb feelings. We're over-informed, and we end up at one of these places. And I hope by now that as we've been talking through this, you guys have had time to self-analyze, to just recognize some of the enemies that you've been tempted to cling to in regards to rest, to admit to being hurried yourself, and to maybe see that our rest issue, it isn't just because of what's happening around us or in the world that we're living in. It's primarily due to what's happening in our hearts. That's where it's coming from. So you and I have hearts and souls that were made for rest. So what would it look like if we pursued God's rest instead of our own? A freely given, eternal rest. Hebrews 4 helps us answer this. At the very beginning of the chapter, here's what it says. Therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. And you may hear that and you're thinking, whoa, wait a minute. We just talked about not earning this thing, and this whole fallen short language, this sounds like earning language. Like, what if I have fallen short? Well, the writer, when he put these words on paper, he was really referencing this event that happened way back when God led his people, the Israelites, out from being enslaved to Egypt. And God was going to give them the promised land. And it was this land known as the land that was that was very desirable to be in, the land flowing with milk and honey. And he was gonna give that to them. He's gonna give them that rest. But Israel saw the offer and they didn't take it. They fell short and they missed out. Hebrews 3, just right before that, chapter 4, they describe it to us. It says, who were they who heard and rebelled? Were they not all those Moses led out of Egypt? And with whom was he angry for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned and whose bodies fell in the desert? And to whom did God swear that they would never enter his rest, if not to those who disobeyed? So we see that they were not able to enter the rest because of their unbelief. It's because of their unbelief. You see, God's people, Israel, they were never asked to earn his rest. They weren't. They just had to believe. To believe and receive the rest that God was going to give them. So what would it look like for us to enter into God's rest and not our own? It looks like belief. It looks like faith. Hebrews 4 tells us, for if we also have had the gospel preached to us just as they did, but the message they heard was of no value to them because those who heard it did not combine it with faith. if you really want true rest, if you really want God's given, never-ending rest to be present in your life, then combine what you are hearing today with faith. Believe. Maybe you're thinking, believe in what? Believe in the gospel story. That God created and initiated rest. That you and I, we screwed it up. And to this day, we still screw it up. Yet despite our rebellion against God and against his rest, God once again brought rest down to us. And this rest is better known as a person named Jesus, who says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I will give you myself, my perfection, my sonship with the Father, my righteousness, my yoke, which is easy, my burden, which is light, and my rest, which will require of me my life. But I will give it for you. I will give it for you. For your imperfections, for your past mistakes, for your future mistakes, for every heavy burden that you carry and every weary day that you live, for your wandering, searching, and hurried soul, I will give my life and I will give my rest to you." You can say, how? Like, I want this rest from Jesus in my life, but how can this exchange happen? Like, what must I do? Just believe. Just believe. Don't just be someone who hears another message about the Savior Jesus Christ dying on your behalf and just doesn't believe it. You may be thinking, I do believe. I hear you. I believe it. I believe it. But maybe you believe everything that's been shared this morning, yet this rest thing still doesn't seem real. And why? It's because belief alone doesn't mean that God's rest will be received. It doesn't. I want to share this by sharing an example with you. Think of a Tesla car, okay? Something I would love to have. Maybe some of you have it, or maybe you've probably for sure heard of a Tesla car. They're awesome. And if you do have one, let me know. I'd love to sit passenger side with you someday. And these Tesla cars, they have this ability to auto drive, which is crazy. And so if I asked you, hey, do you believe that this Tesla can auto drive, that it can take you where you want to go? You'd be like, yeah. I've seen the videos. I've seen the videos on YouTube. I for sure believe that. Okay, great. So let's have you sit now in the Tesla car, and we're gonna have it auto drive while you're physically in the car. You're like, okay, I don't have a problem with that. Yeah, I believe that this thing can do that. Okay. Now let's say that you go inside this Tesla car, and all of a sudden, there's no wheel anymore in the driver's side. Are you still going to let the Tesla car take you to where you want to go? And I explain that example to show what this commentator says, as he put it this way, that we who have wholeheartedly trusted enter God's rest. Thus it is spelled out in no uncertain terms that faith that pleases God, it's belief plus trust. It's both. So are you someone who is merely just believing this morning? Or are you going to take that step of faith and trust in Jesus? In your mind, this literally looks like you handing over control. You're handing over your way of doing things. And with that goes your burdens, goes your weariness. You see, trust is the key to receiving God's rest. So trust in Jesus. It will give you a peace of mind that you will find nowhere else in this world. Trust in Jesus will give you a rest unlike any other rest. It's a rest that goes beyond the circumstances that we face in this life, and it's a rest for your soul. So come to me, Jesus says, all of you who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. Will you trust in that rest this morning?